Three armed men cornered a small woman in a late-night diner. They saw an easy target. The leader pressed his gun against her head, confident he was in control. In 3 seconds, all three attackers were on the floor. They had just made a fatal mistake, threatening a Navy SEAL. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Sara Martinez looked like an easy target. At 5'3" and barely 110 pounds, the 28-year-old woman sitting alone at the corner table of the late-night diner seemed vulnerable. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a plain black t-shirt. She sipped her coffee slowly, occasionally glancing at her phone while picking at a slice of apple pie. The three men who had been watching her from across the street for the past hour saw exactly what they expected to see. A small woman, alone, in an empty diner at 2 in the morning. Perfect. What they could not see was the 6 years of Navy SEAL training that had turned Sara into one of the most dangerous people in that entire city. They could not see the classified missions she had completed in some of the world's most hostile territories. They could not see the combat skills that had kept her alive when bigger, stronger, and more heavily armed enemies had tried to kill her. They saw a victim. They were about to discover their terrible mistake. Sara had noticed the men 15 minutes ago. 3 of them, all large and muscular, wearing dark clothing and standing in the shadows across from the diner. They were trying to be subtle, but Sara's training made her aware of surveillance in ways most people could never understand. She had continued eating her pie and drinking her coffee, but every sense was now alert and ready. She knew what was coming. She had seen this pattern before in a dozen different countries. These men were working themselves up to make their move. The question was not if they would attack, but when. Sara reached for her coffee cup with her left hand while her right hand dropped casually to her lap, closer to the small tactical knife clipped inside her waistband. She appeared relaxed, but every muscle in her body was coiled and ready to explode into action. The diner was nearly empty. Just Sara, an elderly waitress named Betty who was refilling salt shakers behind the counter, and a tired-looking truck driver in a booth near the front door. The cook had gone outside for a smoke break. Bad timing, but Sara would work with what she had. Through the diner's large front windows, Sara watched the 3 men finally cross the street. They moved with the swagger of people who had done this before, who were confident in their ability to intimidate and control. Their mistake was assuming that confidence would be enough. The door chimed as they entered. The truck driver looked up briefly, then went back to his burger. Betty smiled her professional waitress smile and reached for menus. "Sit anywhere you like, boys," she said in her friendly way. The men ignored her. Their eyes were locked on Sara. The leader was the tallest, maybe 6'4", with a shaved head and a scar running down his left cheek. His 2 companions flanked him, one with a heavy build and tattooed arms, the other lean but moving with the kind of controlled grace that suggested martial arts training. They walked directly to Sara's table. The leader pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without asking. His 2 friends positioned themselves on either side of the table, blocking her exits. Classic intimidation tactics. Sara set down her coffee cup and looked up at the leader with an expression of mild curiosity. Inside, she was calculating distances, identifying weapons, planning her response to multiple attack scenarios. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. The leader smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Sara Martinez. We've been looking for you." The use of her full name confirmed what she had already suspected. This was not a random robbery. These men had been sent specifically for her. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Sara said, maintaining her cover as an ordinary civilian. The leader's smile widened. "No confusion. We know exactly who you are. Former military, now working as a security consultant. You've been making some people very unhappy with the questions you've been asking." Sara's mind raced through her recent cases. She had been investigating a smuggling operation that moved weapons through the port. Someone had clearly noticed her digging into their business and decided to send a message. "I'm just having coffee and pie," Sarah said. "You boys should probably leave me alone and go about your business." The tattooed man laughed, a harsh sound with no humor. "You don't get it, lady. We are going about our business. And you're it." The leader leaned forward, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You're going to come with us quietly. We have some people who want to have a conversation with you about your recent activities. You can walk out with us like a good girl, or we can make this difficult. Your choice." Sarah looked at each man in turn, her expression thoughtful. Then she picked up her coffee and took a slow sip. "I choose difficult," she said quietly. The leader's expression hardened. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a pistol, moving it under the table where the waitress and truck driver could not see it. But Sarah could see it perfectly. A Glock 19, standard weapon for street criminals who had some professional training. "Don't be stupid," the leader said. "You're outnumbered and we're armed. Just stand up and walk to the door." Sarah set down her coffee cup. "I'm going to give you one chance to leave. Walk away now, and nobody gets hurt." The three men looked at each other and laughed. The idea that this small woman could pose any threat to them was apparently hilarious. "Last warning," the leader said, his voice harder now. He stood up from his chair, the gun still pointed at Sarah from close range. His two companions moved closer, preparing to grab her arms and force her to her feet. That was when the leader made his fatal mistake. He reached out with his free hand to grab Sarah's arm while bringing the pistol up from under the table. For just a moment, the gun moved close to Sarah's head as he tried to intimidate her with its proximity. "Feel that cold metal against your temple," he said, pressing the barrel against her head. "That's your last chance to cooperate before." He never finished the sentence. Sarah's movement was so fast that none of the three men even processed what was happening until it was over. Her training had taught her that when a weapon gets that close, it stops being the attacker's advantage and becomes an opportunity. Her left hand shot up and grabbed the gun's slide, preventing it from firing by blocking the mechanism. Simultaneously, her right hand trapped his wrist in an iron grip. Before the leader could react, Sarah twisted her entire body, using his own grip on the weapon to pull him off balance. The gun was now pointing away from her and toward the ceiling. The leader's eyes went wide as he realized his weapon had been neutralized in less than a second. He tried to pull the trigger, but Sarah's hand on the slide prevented the gun from cycling. He pulled the trigger twice more in panic, but the weapon was effectively useless. Sarah drove her elbow up into his face with devastating force. The impact shattered his nose and sent blood spraying across the table. As he staggered backward, Sarah completed her weapon disarm, twisting the pistol free from his weakened grip with a move she had practiced 10,000 times in training. The entire disarmament took less than 3 seconds. The tattooed man on her right reacted first, reaching for his own weapon. But Sarah was already moving, flowing from the disarm into her next strike without pause. She pivoted and drove the pistol's grip into his throat, a precise strike to the soft tissue that left him gasping and choking, his hands clutching at his damaged windpipe. The lean man with martial arts training was smarter. Instead of going for a weapon, he launched a fast combination of strikes aimed at Sarah's head and body. His technique was good, the movements of someone who had trained for years. But Sarah had trained against the best fighters in the world. She had sparred with Navy SEAL instructors who made professional martial artists look like beginners. She slipped his first 2 strikes and blocked the third, then drove her knee into his midsection with enough force to lift him off his feet. As he doubled over, Sarah brought her elbow down on the back of his neck. He collapsed to the floor, unconscious before he hit the ground. The whole encounter had taken less than 10 seconds. The leader was still on his feet, blood streaming from his broken nose, his hand reaching for something in his jacket. Sarah's training had taught her never to give an enemy a second chance. She closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps and delivered a spinning back kick to his midsection. The impact drove all the air from his lungs and sent him crashing into the table behind him. The tattooed man was still struggling to breathe, his face turning purple as he fought for air. Sarah kicked his legs out from under him and he went down hard, no longer a threat. Sarah stood in the center of the diner, breathing controlled and steady, the disarmed pistol held in a professional grip. All three attackers were neutralized. The entire fight had lasted maybe 15 seconds from the moment the gun touched her head to the moment the last man fell. Betty the waitress stood frozen behind the counter, her mouth open in shock. The truck driver had pushed himself back into his booth, his eyes wide. "Someone should probably call the police," Sarah said calmly, as if she had just witnessed a minor fender bender rather than single-handedly defeating 3 armed attackers. Betty fumbled for her phone with shaking hands. Sarah kept the weapon pointed in a safe direction while she waited. The leader was groaning, clutching his ribs and his broken nose. The tattooed man was gasping for air but would survive. The lean man remained unconscious but was breathing. The cook came back inside from his smoke break, took one look at the scene, and his cigarette fell from his lips. "What the hell happened?" he asked. "These gentlemen tried to rob the place," Sarah said, providing the cover story that would make the police report simpler. "They picked the wrong night." Betty had managed to dial 911 and was giving the dispatcher the address in a shaky voice. Sarah could already hear sirens in the distance. She looked down at the 3 men who had thought she would be easy prey. They had seen a small woman alone and assumed she was helpless. They had pressed a gun to her head, confident they were in control. They had no idea they were threatening someone who had survived combat against trained enemy soldiers. Someone who had completed missions that remained classified because of their sensitivity. Someone who had earned the right to wear the Navy SEAL trident through determination and skill that most people could not imagine. The irony was not lost on Sarah. She had survived ambushes in hostile foreign territories, firefights with enemy combatants, and covert operations behind enemy lines. And now 3 street criminals had tried to intimidate her in a suburban diner. The result was predictable. 5 minutes later, 3 police cars pulled up outside the diner, their lights flashing red and blue across the parking lot. Officers entered with weapons drawn, ready for an active threat. What they found was a small woman calmly drinking coffee while 3 large men lay groaning on the floor around her. The lead officer was a sergeant named Tom Bradley, a 15-year veteran who thought he had seen everything. He looked at Sarah, looked at the 3 disabled attackers, looked back at Sarah. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "do you want to tell me what happened here?" Sarah set down her coffee cup. "These 3 men entered the diner with a weapon and tried to force me to leave with them. I defended myself." Bradley looked at the scene again. The leader had a clearly broken nose and was clutching his ribs. The tattooed man was still having trouble breathing. The lean man was just starting to regain consciousness. "You did this? All 3 of them?" Bradley asked, his tone suggesting he was having trouble processing the information. "Yes, sir," Sarah said. She reached slowly into her pocket and pulled out her identification, including her military ID that identified her as a former Navy SEAL. "I have training in self-defense." Bradley examined the ID, his eyebrows rising as he read it. He looked at Sarah with new respect. "Former SEAL?" "Yes, sir." Bradley whistled low. "I guess that explains it." He looked at his officers. "Read them their rights. They're under arrest for attempted kidnapping and assault with a deadly weapon." As the officers began handcuffing the 3 groaning men, one of them pulled Bradley aside and showed him something. Bradley's expression grew serious as he listened, then he walked back to Sarah. "Miss Martinez, these men aren't just random criminals. We've been looking for them in connection with a weapons smuggling operation. Were you investigating them?" Sarah nodded. "I'm a private security consultant. I was hired to look into suspicious activity at the port. I believe these men were sent to intimidate me into dropping the investigation." "Well," Bradley said, looking at the 3 handcuffed prisoners, I don't think they're going to be intimidating anyone for a while. You just took down 3 suspects we've been trying to catch for months. More officers arrived, including detectives who would need to take detailed statements. Paramedics checked the 3 attackers for injuries before they were transported to the hospital under guard. Through it all, Sarah remained calm and professional, answering questions and providing details with the precision of someone trained in tactical debriefing. Betty brought her a fresh cup of coffee, on the house. I've been working in diners for 30 years, the elderly waitress said, her voice still shaky, and I have never seen anything like that. You moved so fast I barely saw what happened. Training, Sarah said simply. Lots and lots of training. The truck driver approached cautiously. Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you. If those guys had been serious about robbing the place, who knows what would have happened. You probably saved our lives. Sarah gave him a small smile. Just glad everyone's okay. Detective Maria Santos arrived to take over the investigation. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a reputation for thoroughness. After getting the basic details from Sergeant Bradley, she sat down across from Sarah. Miss Martinez, I need you to walk me through exactly what happened, from the moment these men entered the diner. Sarah provided a detailed account, leaving out nothing relevant to the incident while being careful not to reveal classified information about her military service. Santos took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Sarah finished, the detective sat back and studied her. You know, Santos said, most people in your situation would have been terrified. These were large, armed men threatening your life. But you sound like you're describing a training exercise. In a way, I've trained for situations like this hundreds of times, Sarah said. When something you've practiced that much actually happens, your body just responds. The fear comes later. Santos nodded slowly. The leader, Marcus Reeves, is a known enforcer for the Kozlov organization. They're one of the major players in illegal weapons trafficking on the West Coast. If they sent him after you personally, you must have found something they wanted to keep hidden. Sarah had suspected as much. Her investigation into shipping container irregularities at the port had uncovered a sophisticated smuggling operation. Someone had been moving military-grade weapons through the port hidden in legitimate cargo. The paper trail had led back to several front companies, but she had not yet identified the people behind the operation. I've been documenting irregular shipping patterns and false manifests, Sarah explained. My client hired me to investigate potential security vulnerabilities at the port. I found more than vulnerabilities. I found evidence of systematic smuggling. Santos's expression grew more serious. This goes beyond local jurisdiction. If military weapons are being smuggled, that's federal. I'm going to need to bring in the FBI. Sarah nodded. She had expected this. I have copies of all my evidence at a secure location. I'll cooperate fully with federal investigators. Good, Santos said. In the meantime, I want you to be very careful. The Kozlov organization doesn't give up easily. They sent 3 men tonight, and you took them down. Next time they might send more, or they might try a different approach. Sarah appreciated the detective's concern, but she was not worried. If the Kozlov organization wanted to send more men after her, they would discover the same thing these 3 had learned. Threatening a Navy SEAL was a very bad idea. The investigation continued for another 2 hours. Crime scene technicians photographed everything and collected evidence. The disarmed pistol was bagged as evidence, along with 2 more weapons found on the other attackers. Finally, around 5 in the morning, Sarah was cleared to leave. The sun was starting to rise as she walked out of the diner. She had given multiple statements, provided contact information, and agreed to follow-up meetings with both local police and federal agents. Betty insisted on packing her a bag of pastries and a large coffee to go. You take care of yourself, honey, the waitress said, patting Sarah's hand. And if you ever want pie on the house, you just come on by. Sarah drove home in the early morning light, her mind processing the night's events. The three attackers had made a fundamental error. They had judged her by her appearance and assumed she would be easy to control. They had no idea who they were dealing with. That was the thing about being a Navy SEAL that most people did not understand. The training changed you at a fundamental level. It was not just about physical skills, though those were important. It was about mindset, about staying calm under pressure, about seeing opportunities where others saw only threats. When that gun pressed against her head, the leader thought he had all the power. What he did not realize was that by getting that close, he had given Sarah exactly what she needed. In close quarters combat, sometimes the person with the weapon is at a disadvantage if their opponent knows what they are doing. And Sarah definitely knew what she was doing. Back at her apartment, Sarah made herself breakfast and sat down to review her investigation files. The attack had actually confirmed several of her suspicions about the smuggling operation. The Kozlov organization had shown their hand by coming after her directly. That meant she was getting close to something important. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed it was her client, David Chen, who ran the port security company that had hired her. "Sarah, I just heard what happened," Chen said, his voice concerned. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Sarah assured him. "The three men who attacked me are in custody. The police called me for background on your investigation. They said you took down all three attackers by yourself. Is that true?" "It is." There was a pause on the line. "Sarah, I knew you had military experience, but I had no idea. The police said you were a Navy SEAL." "I don't usually advertise it," Sarah said. "Most people have misconceptions about what that means." "Well, whatever it means, I'm damn glad you were the one I hired. Listen, given what happened, I understand if you want to step back from this investigation. These people are obviously dangerous." Sarah smiled. "Mr. Chen, the fact that they came after me means we're getting close to something they want to protect. I don't quit when things get dangerous. That's when the work gets interesting." Chen laughed, relieved. "I was hoping you'd say that. The FBI wants access to all your files. They're treating this as a major federal case now." "Good," Sarah said. "They have resources I don't. Between what I've found and what they can do with it, we might be able to shut down this entire operation." They talked for a few more minutes about logistics and coordination with federal investigators. After hanging up, Sarah opened her laptop and began preparing her files for transfer to the FBI. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Tom Bradley, the police sergeant from the diner. "Thought you should know. Marcus Reeves is singing like a bird. Wants a deal. Says he can give up the whole smuggling operation in exchange for reduced charges. The FBI is very interested. Your investigation might just break this case wide open." Sarah smiled. The attack had backfired spectacularly for the Kozlov organization. Not only had they failed to intimidate her, but they had lost 3 of their enforcers and given law enforcement a witness willing to testify. All because they had made one critical error. They had pressed a gun to the head of a Navy SEAL and expected her to be afraid. 2 weeks later, Sarah sat in a federal courthouse watching as indictments were handed down against 14 members of the Kozlov smuggling operation. Marcus Reeves had indeed provided detailed testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. His information, combined with Sarah's investigation, had given federal prosecutors everything they needed. The case made national news. "Major weapons smuggling ring broken," read the headlines. Sarah's role was mentioned only briefly and without details, which was how she preferred it. Detective Santos found her in the hallway outside the courtroom after the proceedings. "You did good work," Santos said. "This case is going to put some very bad people in prison for a very long time." "Just glad I could help," Sarah said. Santos smiled. "You know, Reeves told us something interesting during his debriefing. He said when his boss sent him after you, they were told you'd be an easy target. Just some private investigator asking questions. Nobody mentioned you were former special operations." Why would they? Sarah said. It's not on my business cards. Reeves said if he'd known, he never would have taken the job. He said pressing a gun to a Navy SEAL's head was the stupidest thing he'd ever done in his life. Sarah laughed. He's probably right about that. He also said, Santos continued, that in the 2 seconds after you grabbed his gun, he realized he had made a terrible mistake. He said you moved faster than anyone he'd ever seen, and he's been in street fights with professional criminals his whole life. Training, Sarah said simply. When you practice something enough times, it becomes automatic. Santos shook her head in amazement. You're something else, Miss Martinez. If you ever get tired of private consulting and want to join law enforcement, give me a call. We could use someone with your skills. Sarah thanked her but politely declined. She liked working independently, choosing her own cases, setting her own schedule. The structure of military life had been necessary for her development, but now she valued her freedom. As she left the courthouse, Sarah reflected on how the whole situation had unfolded. 3 men had approached her in a diner, confident in their size and their weapons. They had seen a small woman and assumed she was helpless. They had no idea they were threatening someone who had survived situations far more dangerous than anything they could imagine. Someone who had been trained by the best military instructors in the world, someone who had proven herself in combat against real enemies in real war zones. The gun pressed to her head was meant to be their moment of control, the ultimate intimidation. Instead, it had been the beginning of their defeat. That was the thing about being underestimated. It gave you an advantage that no amount of size or weapons could overcome. People made assumptions based on appearance, and those assumptions created opportunities. Sarah had built a successful career partly on the fact that people constantly underestimated her. They saw a small woman and never imagined she could be dangerous. By the time they realized their error, it was usually too late. She drove home, already thinking about her next case. Another client had called about suspicious activity at a construction site. Probably nothing as dramatic as weapons smuggling, but you never knew. One thing was certain. If anyone tried to threaten her during that investigation, they would learn the same lesson Marcus Reeves and his friends had learned. Never press a gun to a Navy SEAL's head. It never ends well for the person holding the gun. Sarah smiled as she drove through the city streets. Life after the military had turned out to be more interesting than she had expected. She was making a good living, helping people solve problems, and occasionally reminding criminals why threatening trained special operations personnel was a very bad idea. The sun was setting over San Diego, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sarah rolled down her window and breathed in the evening air. It was good to be home. It was good to be free. And it was very good to be someone who could handle themselves when trouble came calling. Somewhere in the city, criminals were making plans, thinking about their next scores, their next victims. Some of them might even be thinking about the small woman who had taken down 3 armed men in a diner. Sarah hoped they were thinking about her. She hoped the story was spreading through the criminal underworld. Because the more criminals who heard about what happened when you threatened Sarah Martinez, the fewer criminals would be stupid enough to try it. And that was perfectly fine with her. She pulled into her apartment complex parking lot, grabbed her bag, and headed inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, new problems to solve. But tonight, she would relax, maybe watch a movie, definitely order pizza. Because that was the other thing about being a Navy SEAL that people did not understand. Yes, she could fight off multiple armed attackers. Yes, she had skills most people could only dream of. But she was also just a person who liked pizza and movies and quiet evenings at home. The difference was, nobody would ever make the mistake of thinking that made her weak. Not after word got around about what happened in that diner. Not after 3 armed criminals discovered why you should never, ever press a gun to a Navy SEAL's head.